The Daily Mail is not known for its great relationship with young people. The issues we face are almost always dismissed on the pages of the Mail, and the columnists have absolutely no problem playing into this dynamic. Writing in the Mail on Thursday, retired sociology professor Frank Furedi penned an article that was titled, "No wonder so many young people are now long-term sick when they've been taught to believe they are fragile." What a title. So Furedi goes on to say, working Britain is in serious trouble. A shocking new report has revealed that tens of thousands of graduates are leaving university only to join the ranks of Britain's ever-growing numbers of long-term sick. When the young behave in ways that veer from the norm, society no longer calls them unruly or troublesome, but slaps them with a medical label. Confused or insecure children are diagnosed as depressed or suffering from trauma. Energetic or disruptive youngsters are invariably presumed to be suffering from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. So, the next bit says, all this naked self-indulgence is becoming a public health crisis. It is making young people more fragile, not more resilient, more prone to see themselves as victims and less as capable adults. And it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Tell children that they are likely to suffer stress, trauma, and depression when they're doing their exams, and many will experience precisely that. But is this actually right? The Daily Mail will fill your granddad's head with nonsense week in and week out, seek out old retired sociology professors to tout out bullshit theories that are rejected by sociologists and by the evidence. In the Health Foundation's analysis of the figures Furedi is referring to, they state that mental ill health is now the most common cause of work-limiting conditions among those aged 44 years and younger. This represents a significant shift from 2013, when mental health conditions were less prevalent as a cause of work limitations among young workers, and ranked behind both musculoskeletal and chronic conditions. While increased awareness of and changing attitudes towards mental health may play a role in this shift, evidence from diagnostic questionnaires also indicate a rise in mental ill health over the past decade, corroborating self-reported data. The important part there is that last sentence, corroborating diagnostic questionnaires with the self-reported data. In other words, we can diagnose people from the symptoms they describe, so we know they aren't just imagining that they are mentally ill or thinking themselves into it because they're not cheery enough, right? That's not what's going on here. It's also worth noting that the Health Foundation's analysis showed an increase in work-limiting health conditions across all age groups. Now, you'd expect older people to suffer more conditions, naturally, so that's not surprising, but the increase from a decade ago does show that health conditions are worsening overall. Now, it could just be a coincidence that 10 years of austerity seems to coincide with a decline in people's health across the board. And it could all be down to the fact that we're all snowflakes. Maybe if some older people with musculoskeletal disorders just pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and stopped seeing themselves as victims, they wouldn't suffer so much more illness than they used to either. Maybe it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and if you just keep telling yourself that you're suffering from chronic disorders like arthritis, then you'll inevitably suffer from chronic disorders like arthritis. You'll inevitably experience exactly that. Or maybe we could be honest and say that this is a health crisis, both physical and mental, that's due to the severe underfunding of services, the lack of hope and fun in young people's lives, and the devastation of the planet. Ayden, what do you think about this? It's a pretty grim being a young working class person in Britain right now, isn't it?
God. Yeah, it's terrible being a young working class person in Britain. I mean, I don't even fully classify myself as a young working class person anymore. I'm sort of out of that category at this point, but working class nonetheless. So growing up in this country was already, difficult being working class, but there was access to things. Sort of the Blairite government, for all of their foibles, had some elements of community funding that allowed you to kind of get a step in. I had community clubs that I went to. I had ways of finding people, that's kind of the thing, and then creating fun from that. And as time has gone on and funding has gotten more and more scarce in this country, young people constantly being told to take the shitty end of the stick and be happy about it. It's finally coming out in the figures that that's going to have an everlasting effect on us. And I think a prime way that you can see that is, and it sounds quite nothing, but the way the nightlife is in major cities in this country is nothing compared to what it was like for like literally decades. It's completely been destroyed by sort of lack of funding, the lack of innovation. There's just no money in the country to really have these kinds of leisure activities anymore. And it's stripped the joy away from young people of having a nightlife, you know, being able to eat past 1 a.m. in a city, which normally is something you should be able to do. But in this country, it's becoming harder and harder to do. And I think that is kind of it's a symbol of deeper problems within our culture, that young people are constantly expected to just give things up and be happy about it. And now we're seeing it have the negative effect on them. And for the Daily Mail to then be like, you're just a bunch of snowflakes, actually. You've got things so easy. You're thinking yourself sick. It's just, it's gaslighting on the biggest scale I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, funnily enough, I was going to bring up Nights Out, so that
Yeah.
that was really well. Kind of, we're on the same wavelength there. But the other day I was out in the sort of big local town near where I live, and it was a Friday night like tonight, and there was barely anyone out, like barely anyone. It was dead, and it's absolutely shocking. The not only that, but like the lack of actual shops. You know, never mind small businesses, but just any shops that are still in operation in town centers where you could like potentially get a job and stuff like that that could potentially fund your night out. Just it's not happening. And I think there's been I think I mentioned this the last time I hosted as well. I've got to stop bringing this up as a complaint. But the people who are going out most now are aged between about 40 and 60 because they're the people with the money to be able to go out and pay the extortionate prices for alcohol, you know?
Yeah. It's that constant thing where everything's being weighed more towards an older generation that has more money and more power. But that ever sliding scale never seems to want to tip back at all and give people that are getting older that. It just feels like the window of people without any money is getting older and older and older. Because I'm about to turn 28, and my clubbing days are pretty much behind me. But if I go out, I live in London, so I go out in London on a Friday and Saturday night, and it is true, I'll see a lot of like older married couples on a night out going to the theater and stuff like that, but almost no young people. And every young person I know that's either my age or a bit younger, they're more interested in going to a house party simply because it's cost effective. And now I understand young people having no money. It's not a brand new concept that you're not going to be very, very wealthy. But like you say, this idea that having shops in the high street and having small businesses getting started up and having, you know, systems in place so people can get into work at younger ages and not have to rely on, you know, having degrees and stuff to get into well-paying jobs. Like all of these things play into young people being able to do something with their life and enjoy it whilst they do it. And the fact that we're not seeing them out on the streets enjoying themselves and being a part of the public life and taking themselves back to their houses and back to their rooms, back online to enjoy themselves is not the sign of a healthy country. It's not a sign of a healthy society at all.
Yeah, I often do think there's sort of like swings and roundabouts to being part of each generation. And I do like I wouldn't want to give up the like technological connection that our generation has. But at the same time, just lacking those basics, lacking those the ability to sort of like, you know, go out on nights out. It's not not the only concern that we should talk about, but it is one of the things that's kind of symptomatic and it sort of makes our lives more miserable. There's also the other side to it, which is like the lack of youth services you mentioned, but also climate change. Like the idea that we might not have a future that's free of like famine and war and water shortages. You know, I think it was Ash Sakar who said, "I don't want to spend my 70s guarding a water bottle with a sniper rifle. That's not how I want to spend my 70s." You know, like I think that sort of that devastation, that sort of feeling of hopelessness, it eats away at the back of your mind, and that sort of thing can lead in many ways to this kind of mental health crisis. But it's just conditions in the same way as it's conditions for like elderly people as they get older to become you know to suffer more musculoskeletal conditions, to suffer more chronic conditions. It seems to me that if you put people in conditions where they're faced with a future where we just might not have a future, then things are going to get really really sucky really quickly, and more young people are going to suffer from mental health problems. I'm about your age. I'm 26. I turn 27 later this year. And I don't know about you, but I certainly know people I've lost, to mental health related conditions. And it's something that, like, it's hit our generation in a way that I don't think a lot of older people can necessarily quite understand. Being forced through the school system like this, it's
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I think that we've all been touched by sort of things like that in a way that I don't think a lot of generations have been, or if they have, they haven't been aware of the reasons as to what's led to it. Whereas we're more acutely aware of sort of the weight that the world takes on our brains and our psyches. But I think you touched on a good point there by basically saying that we've stripped away hope from young people. And one of the greatest things young people have is a bit of hope and a bit of stupidity, not knowing that they don't know how to do things, so they do them anyway. That's kind of the thing a young person needs in order to succeed. But you've taken that away from them, because the way that we see governments treat anything, any kind of, look at the way that a lot of them handled the COVID pandemic. Like, ultimately, we managed to keep that under, a certain level. It wasn't an extinction level an event for us, which could have been. But the way that it was handled, even that, we thought, man, that was all we needed for that was a vaccine. To get them to work together, we have to solve climate change. That's a way bigger problem. So they barely managed to get the vaccine to work properly, let alone them do this. So young people have just watched these governments fumble things after fumbling things. And I think it's just eaten away at this idea that eventually things will get better. And young people now are kind of feeling that. And they're feeling that there is a lack of hope about how our governments will deal with the biggest problem facing us as a race, as humans.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.